You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
I'll tell you what the American people's mandate is. Heal the nation. It's why he ran. That is why he won. That is the most critical near-term issue, managing the pandemic. It does seem as if these state polls massively misled us. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
I didn't know, was my child dead? Is my child passed out?
I just kept saying, please be okay, please be okay.
You rush your child to the hospital.
A woman came in, normal clothes. We get down the hallway, and she closes the door. They were accusing me of child abuse.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Hey, calm down.
No, it's my children. I can't calm down.
Do No Harm, a new podcast series from NBC News and Wondery. First 2 episodes available now. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
What is next for the president, and how far can he take his legal fight? Sonam Sheth, political business journalist at Business Insider, and Kim Whately, professor of law and author of the book What You Need to Know About Voting and Why, and NBC correspondent Leanne Caldwell from Capitol Hill. Leanne, before we turn to the president's refusal to admit defeat, we have results from some key contests that will impact the balance of power in the Senate. Can you give us an update?
Sure, Lindsay. So it is now clear that with Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Senator Sullivan of Alaska winning their re-election races, both Republicans, that Senate Republicans now have 50 seats in the Senate. If it wasn't clear before this, now it is that Georgia is going to be essential to who controls the Senate. The reason is because if Democrats win those 2 Georgia seats, then it is a 50-50 tie, and the Vice President Kamala Harris would come in to break any sort of tie. If Republicans win those 2 Georgia seats, and they're going to have a slim majority, 52 to a Democrat's 48. That's why you're going to be sending a lot. People are going to be spending a lot of money there for their respective parties to win that race. But I will say one more thing, Lindsay, and that is either way, either party that wins, it is a slim majority. Yes, 51 is a critical number here in the Senate, but so is 60. 60 is the number you need to get any sort of legislation passed. And so a slim majority means that party will be able to set the agenda, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to get anything passed if they don't have any bipartisan support, Lindsay.
Important distinction there. Thank you. Sonam, some leaders from around the world have congratulated President-elect Biden. Do you think that makes President Trump's legal fights less relevant?
I don't know that it has a direct effect on his legal fights, but it certainly has an effect on the U.S.'s foreign policy. We have seen the vast majority of world leaders congratulate President-elect Biden on his victory in the 2020 election, and it certainly poses somewhat of a dilemma for the Trump administration, because you have the president and people like the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, saying that, there's going to be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Meanwhile, Pompeo today was traveling to 7 countries, all of whose leaders have directly congratulated Joe Biden on winning the election. And certainly that highlights a discrepancy and a juxtaposition between how the rest of the world is receiving Biden's victory and how the Trump presidency, the Trump administration is responding to it. In terms of the president's legal fights, I think what makes them less relevant is the substance of the lawsuits themselves. My colleague and I have actually been tracking each and every lawsuit, and it seems like the campaign and Republican officials have filed something like over a dozen lawsuits so far, but none of them have been matching up with the president's claims of widespread voter fraud and election rigging and, a vast conspiracy between the Democratic Party and big media. And we've seen court after court and judge after judge strike down or deny a lot of these requests. And so I think at this point, it's really just more of a waiting game to see how far these lawsuits progress, if at all.
So how long will that waiting game be? Kim, a legal advisor to the Trump campaign, appeared on Fox Business Network and claims the Trump campaign, they hope to have this wrapped up within the next couple of weeks, the next 2 weeks. Is that reasonable?
Well, I believe that was in reference to the Pennsylvania lawsuit that originally went to the Supreme Court prior to the election, in which the allegation is that ballots counted, received by the third election day, but counted later, should be invalidated. It's possible that could wrap up. I mean, at the end of the day, it's only the dispute's only around 7,000 or 8,000 ballots. Joe Biden won the state of Pennsylvania by a much larger margin. So, all of these lawsuits, as was previously indicated, either have flaws in their legal theory and or just a lack of facts. And the courts are seeing through this. But the problem really is the perception. A lot of Americans are increasingly anxious that somehow Donald Trump's, just like he has many times, going to be able to smash norms and pull a rabbit out of his hat and somehow undo a legitimate election by false claims of voter fraud that people perceive if a lawsuit's filed, there must be something there. But the way the legal system works is you can file anything. It's after the lawsuit's filed that the judge actually tests the legitimacy of the claim. And we're seeing these claims thrown out because there really isn't A, any fraud, or B, any basis for changing the ultimate tally numbers. So I suspect Joe Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th, notwithstanding these machinations by the Trump campaign and even, unfortunately, the Secretary of State.
Leanne, could this delayed transition right now affect Congress and how it operates at all?
Well, Lindsay, that is the question that we're asking a lot of these senators, that while they are on the side of the president, these Republicans saying he has the right to make these legal challenges, in practicality, this is the time that the transition is supposed to be happening. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was asked about this yesterday, and let's listen to what he had to say.
I don't think anything that's occurred so far interrupts an ordinary process of moving through the various steps that I indicated and allowing, if there is a new administration, it to work through the transition. All of these steps will be taken at the appropriate time.
Well, experts we are talking to say that every hour, every day makes a difference in this transition. There's not a lot of time between Election Day and Inauguration Day, and there's a lot of material that has to be handed off and a lot of coordination that has to take place. You are, though, Lindsay, starting to see some cracks among Senate Republicans who still mostly say that the president does have his right to pursue these legal challenges. But you're hearing from some national intelligence type figures, including the co-chair of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Marco Rubio, saying that while the president is undergoing these challenges, the transition should still be going on simultaneously. So that's a sign that there is starting to be some worry on Capitol Hill among even Republicans that this transition has not started in earnest. Lindsay.
All right, Leanne, Sonam, Kim, thank you so much. Loved this panel. Like Biden and Dr. Biden stopped at Philadelphia's Korean War Memorial, joining local officials at a wreath laying to honor veterans before returning home to Wilmington. That is where we find NBC's Mike Memley. Mike, Veterans Day is personal for the Bidens. Their son, Beau, served overseas. What else can you tell us about how they're acknowledging today?
Yeah, Lindsay, obviously, the last 2 days we've seen the president-elect doing different policy announcements, one on the pandemic task force, yesterday talking about the implications of the Supreme Court case on the Affordable Care Act. Today is a solemn day for the Biden family, and they marked it by heading up to Philadelphia to acknowledge the service of those in our armed forces. And, you know, in a statement that the president-elect released, he talked about several things. One is being a president who would honor the service of those who've served. Remember, during the campaign, Biden really seized on the reports that President Trump had denigrated those in the armed forces as losers or suckers. Secondly, he did talk about, of course, his son, Beau, and his service in Iraq as part of the Delaware National Guard. And in that statement, he noted something that he has often quoted in a poem that those serve who also stand and wait. The toll that the service of our armed forces takes on their families who have to go about their family life without a father, a mother serving abroad. And he also talked about what he would do as president, honoring those who served, making commitments to those for mental health. And so a day for Biden to show the kind of leadership he would show as president. Interestingly, Lindsay, his visit to this war memorial came almost at the exact same time as President Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery. So it presented something of an interesting split-screen moment for the country.
Yeah, and yesterday the president-elect was answering questions about his transition. You had a chance to ask about conversations with world leaders. What did you learn?
Yeah, and interestingly, we've seen the campaign, the transition now release readouts of multiple conversations with foreign leaders, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, President of France, the German Chancellor among them. And I asked the president-elect, what are you telling these leaders, especially about the situation we're seeing at home? Let's take a listen to his answer.
First of all, I'm letting them know that America's back. We're going to be back in the game. It's not American alone. I feel confident that we're going to be able to put America back in the place of respect that it had before.
What's so striking about the fact that these conversations are going on is that we've seen in some cases more world leaders acknowledging his victory than Republicans on Capitol Hill. And I noted since we last spoke, Lindsay, I just watched a clip from the Prime Minister's questions in London where Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, was really gushing about the conversation he had with the president-elect. One of his rivals on the Labour bench across the aisle asked if he had a message for President Trump, noting that his refusal to acknowledge the election results was damaging to the U.S. democracy. Johnson sidestepped that question and, again, just simply talked about how important it was to have a good relationship with the White House.
Oh, thank you for that latest update. And, Mike, the last thing I want to ask you, we know that Biden and McConnell have a history of working together. Do you feel like this time right now is going to damage their relationship?
Well, I think as senators who served alongside each other for at least a couple decades, I also saw during the Obama administration how often Joe Biden was the person who went up to Capitol Hill when there was a stalemate to try to break through the logjams. And there were many, as we remember, during the Obama administration with Republicans on Capitol Hill. I think they both understand their different political positions at the moment and the sensitivity of what Senator McConnell is going through, especially with those runoff elections in Georgia to come. Biden was asked yesterday if they had spoken. He said not yet, but let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I haven't had a chance to speak to Mitch. My expectation is that I will do that in not too distant future. I think that the whole Republican Party has been put in a position, with a few notable exceptions, of being mildly intimidated by the sitting president.
Now, this Biden-McConnell relationship is going to be absolutely critical, especially if Republicans hang on to their majority based on those Georgia runoff elections, not just on policy. McConnell could potentially block any legislation from coming to the floor for a vote at all, but especially on nominations. Biden also said yesterday that the makeup of the Senate wasn't going to have an impact on who he would name for key cabinet positions, but a lot of folks on the transition on the Democratic side, they acknowledge that absolutely that may end up being pivotal in terms of some of the names he ends up choosing.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike Memoli. We appreciate it. Record high voter turnouts gave both President Trump and President-elect Biden a boost on Election Day. A key demographic, Latino voters, who made up 13% of the electorate. According to an NBC News exit poll, 65% of Latino voters supported Joe Biden, while 32% voted for President Trump. NBC News political editor Carrie Dan joins us now. Carrie, President Trump saw a 5-point increase with Latino voters compared to 2016. How did that happen?
Well, that's absolutely right, Lindsay. Joe Biden kind of hit just around Hillary Clinton's number from 4 years ago, getting 65. She got 65% of the vote. But for Donald Trump, he actually improved his number for a net 5-point swing in the president's direction among Latino voters. And this was, I think, part of a concerted effort by the Trump campaign to identify Latino voters who would be receptive to his message. One thing that you saw a lot of Spanish language ads airing in key markets that linked Democrats to totalitarian leaders in Latin America. This was a message you heard a lot from the Trump campaign to try to win over Latino voters who might be receptive, including, for example, in Miami-Dade County. There was a lot of advertising targeting Cuban American as well as Venezuelan American voters who might be open to that kind of message. And I think among Democrats, there is some soul searching about that directional change being more favorable for the president this time around compared to 4 years ago. And part of that is a discussion about how, Latino voters, just like any other block of voters, are in no way a monolith. And there are enormous differences based on, for example, age or gender or country of origin, how long a Latino voter has been in the United States. A Venezuelan senior who lives in Miami is going to have a very different viewpoint on American politics than a young Mexican in Phoenix, Arizona, for example.
Let's dive into that a little bit more, those demographics. What can you tell us about the breakdown of women and men?
Well, we see a big gender difference, and it's one that actually mirrors what we see in the rest of the country. Going into the election, our pollster who works on Latino issues said, when you talk about Hispanics as the backbone of the American party, you're really talking much more about Latinas than you are talking about Hispanic men. You saw Joe Biden doing about 10 points better among Latino women than among men. And those are differences that you see both, in gender, in age, as I was saying, in country of origin. There are big divides within this community. And the Trump campaign made a very concerted effort to identify those segments of the Latino population that might vote for Trump and advertised pretty effectively to make a difference in some key markets, not everywhere, but in key places that made a difference in states like, for example, Florida and Texas.
Carrie, can you pull up the microscope a little bit? Let's break it down county by county in some of the states with the largest number of the Latino population.
That's right. Well, if you've been watching election coverage for the last week, you've heard a lot about Miami-Dade. This is overwhelmingly a Hispanic population. Hillary Clinton won here by almost 30 points. Joe Biden's margin is just 7 points. And this is exactly the kind.
Oh, it sounds like, Carrie, we lost you. I'm so bummed. I was really looking forward to taking that deep geographical dive, but we will work on getting your shot back. Thank you so much, Carrie Dam. President-elect Biden is moving forward with the transition process despite the lack of support from the Trump camp, all while President Trump made his first official appearance today for the first time in 6 days. We are joined now by NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Let's talk about the headline in the New York Times today confirming there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election, which we have been saying. And these are bipartisan officials who are confirming this. Do you think this reporting will have any effect on the White House?
I don't think so, nor on the president's campaign. In fact, yesterday we ended up seeing the president and his allies launching a lawsuit in Michigan, a state, by the way, where Joe Biden not only won the state, but has 150,000 vote lead there. And so I think when you look at the totality of the lawsuits that is coming from President Trump and his allies, it really is to kind of gum up the system, to kind of increase some uncertainty that's out there, to latch on to narratives that maybe the election wasn't on the up and up. But as the New York Times reporting indicates, NBC's news own reporting indicates, there was no widespread fraud in this election. And in fact, this election ended up running smoother than anyone could have imagined, given the circumstances of a pandemic that was going on.
And the margins weren't as close as everybody earlier predicted. There are reports that a majority of Republicans are standing by the president because they need his support for the Georgia runoff elections, and they need to win to hold on to control of the Senate. Is that a winning strategy?
So Republicans certainly believe it is. And you end up looking at what the president was able to do on Election Day. And he did bring a lot of his supporters to the polls. You end up having a kind of a combination of some Republicans who might have voted for Joe Biden, but decided to vote down ballot for Republicans. You add that to President Trump's base. And that's one of the reasons why I do think that you end up having some overperformance among Republicans. Lindsay, on the other hand, though, with Republicans saying, hey, you know what, President Trump's really going to be able to help us in the Georgia runoffs, do note that this was the worst Georgia result statewide that Republicans have had since 1992. You end up having a situation where Joe Biden now has a lead of about 15,000 votes in Georgia. They are going to 2 runoffs. We have no idea what the turnout is going to be in those. And I think there's been an argument that we're going to uncharted waters, and that maybe the president isn't that great of an asset as a lot of these Republican strategists think.
I want to bring Carrie back into the fold. Carrie, is there anything about what Mark just said that you want to respond to, or would you like to keep doing that deep dive into the geographical breakdown of the vote?
Well, there's a great transition here because we can start, we can keep talking about Texas counties because my colleague Mark Murray is from Texas. So we can keep diving into that because he may want to weigh in. He may want to weigh in here as well.
Go for it, Carrie. Yes.
In El Paso, Texas, this is a place where Democrats have historically done well. Joe Biden won overwhelmingly this time as well. But Hillary Clinton 4 years ago won El Paso County by 43 points. For Joe Biden, that's 34 points. So you can see in a way that Donald Trump was able to eat into those margins. Democrats were very optimistic that they were going to be able to win over Latino voters as well as boost turnout in urban areas and suburban areas in order to make Texas competitive. These kind of drop-offs with Latinos was one really big reason why that didn't happen. And finally, let's go to Zapata County, Texas. This is a really enormous, enormous swing. This is a place that Hillary Clinton won by 33 points 4 years ago. Donald Trump currently winning it. And this is a very heavily Latino county. It's probably about 90% Mexican Americans that are there. It's very rural. It's very focused on the energy industry. And in kind of doing the postmortem about why a small rural county like this would swing so dramatically, some local leaders are pointing to comments that Joe Biden made about the energy industry, saying that he wants to phase out of oil. That's something that could have been a very detrimental message to Biden's campaign here in a community where, yes, I mean, this is on the Mexican border. There's probably a lot of voters who disagree with the president's rhetoric on immigration or the wall. But ultimately, perhaps those economic and those energy industry concerns ruled the day among especially these sort of culturally conservative Hispanics that Democrats are looking back now and saying we could have worked harder and we shouldn't have taken those voters for granted.
So, Mark, given what Carrie just said, what do you see in terms of the future of Texas? We know that, for example, Beto O'Rourke has been trying to turn it blue. What does this data tell you moving forward?
Democrats have a lot of work to do. And I think there's this argument that a lot of Democrats made across the country that turnout ends up benefiting Democrats. That the more people who go out to vote, the Democrats are always going to be on the right side of the ballot ledger. And while I think nationally that turned out to be true, in a place like Texas where everyone's voting, we ended up seeing that Republicans actually did better. And so Democrats need to end up probably organizing and mobilizing a little bit more. You know, just to Carrie's point, you know, my hometown county of Hidalgo County, Texas, was also a place where in 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by about 2/3 to 1/3. This time around, it went for Joe Biden 58% to Donald Trump 40%. So again, improvement for President Trump. And what we're seeing in the counties that Carrie was just ended up highlighting and including in Hidalgo County, President Trump ended up making gains in more rural, less educated, big counties in Texas with Latinos. Actually, Latinos outside of Houston and Dallas actually kind of ended up conforming like we saw in 2016. And so, as Carrie was kind of mentioning to you, I think a lot of the gender divides between men and women, a lot of the education divides between college education and non-college end up explaining, or actually now, you know, it's important to note that the Latino vote isn't monolithic. And so we're seeing those same divides play out within that demographic group.
Carrie and Mark, I may not be from Texas, but I am a child of the Southwest, so I hope I can still hang out with you guys at the cool kids table in a post-pandemic world. Thank you so much to both of you.
Always.
Go on, Dan.
Bye.
Up next, we mark this Veterans Day with a war hero's story. Stay with us.
Close-knit group of nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient, you're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
White sandy beaches, crystal blue water. How incredible is that? We only get one shot at making the first impression.
We're here to work, or you will be gone.
high-maintenance charter guest.
This crew needs to step it up.
New crew, perfect storm.
This is not open!
Get back to this boat now. Suck it up, cream puff.
Set your DVR to watch new episodes of Bravo's Below Deck every Monday after 9.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
I'll tell you what the American people's mandate is: heal the nation. It's why he ran. That is why he won. That is the most critical near-term issue, managing the pandemic. It does seem as if these state polls massively misled us. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
I didn't know, was my child dead? Is my child passed out?
I just kept saying, please be okay, please be okay.
You rush your child to the hospital.
A woman came in, normal clothes. We get down the hallway, and she closes the door. They were accusing me of child abuse.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Hey, calm down.
No, it's my children. I can't calm down.
Do No Harm, a new podcast series from NBC News and Wondery. First 2 episodes available now. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
Today is Veterans Day, where we honor those who have served in the United States Armed Forces. President Trump marking the day by attending the annual ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Joining us now is Colonel Jack Jacobs, NBC's military analyst, a veteran himself, and a Medal of Honor recipient. Colonel, I am humbled to be joined by you, and I want to ask you, what do you think President Trump's legacy will be when it comes to the military?
Well, there are so many different pieces. He started to withdraw from areas where we're not doing very well in Southwest Asia, increased the size of the defense budget, which probably is not going to get reduced in Biden's administration. They want to keep it at least flat. Increased our reliance on technological capability, which is a good thing in many respects. You could argue about the Space Force. It sounds silly, and it may not be the right vehicle, but it's something we have to think about, how to defend ourselves in that area. But the single most significant legacy is a negative one. His disparagement of allies and alliances has given great pause around the world about our capability and our intention in defending our own interests and the interests of others in areas that are threatened, and has emboldened our enemies, and that's something that may last a long time and will take a great deal of time to repair. Is one of the reasons Biden is out there talking about how America is back now. Lindsay.
And disparaging allies and also disparaging those who have served, namely the late Senator John McCain. How do you think that affected the way some members of the military viewed him?
Well, adversely, most of them, as a matter of fact. He was held in very high regard. And when Trump said that about, this is during the campaign, before he became president, said that about McCain, it left a very bad taste in everyone's mouth. And then subsequently, the things he said about the general officers who were in his administration, disparaging them as well, that didn't sit very well with people in uniform. That's going to take some time to repair. There's an expectation that things will get better, but the Biden administration is going to have to reach out to these people because there's always trepidation with a new administration.
especially one that talks about changing things dramatically, if there's a perception that the Biden administration is not going to repair that road between the military establishment and the administration, things are not going to go very well.
If I can read between the lines of what you're saying, I'm hearing that you believe Biden's first order of business will be repairing some relationships with our foreign allies. In terms of potentially reinstating troops that President Trump withdrew, for example, in Syria, many felt that we had abandoned our Kurdish allies. Do you see Biden reversing any of those decisions?
It's hard to see that's happening. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Biden from those within his party not to do that. And don't forget, all this stuff costs money. Money is one of those things that's going to be in short supply, especially after the pandemic is over. And coronavirus in general is going to cost the United States, has cost the United States a great deal of money. There's not going to be a lot of money to throw around. And I think some of the missions from which we have been withdrawing, I don't think we're going to go back in there. I think we're going to project our power in a number of different ways. But in the areas you're talking about, through unconventional operations where we are instructing indigenous forces to defend themselves with our help. But putting more troops back on the ground, I don't think that's going to happen under Biden.
Colonel Jack Jacobs, today and every day, thank you for your service. This Veterans Day, a story of the push to honor an Army sergeant who gave everything to save his comrades. His name, Alwyn Cash, and overnight, the U.S. Senate unanimously passed legislation that clears the way for the president to award Sergeant Cash the Medal of Honor, the country's highest award for valor in combat. If that happens, he would become the first African-American to receive that honor for service in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Here's NBC's Craig Melvin.
In certain parts of Central Florida, they know the name Alwyn Cash. There's a post office and an Army Reserve Center named in his honor. The lush Florida landscape is far from the Sunni Triangle of Iraq, where Army Sergeant Cash made the ultimate sacrifice in 2005. Just after midnight on October 17th, Sergeant Cash's unit left on patrol in 2 armored Bradley fighting vehicles. Not far from the base, the lead vehicle hit a powerful IED. Cash and Douglas Dodge were in that lead vehicle.
The explosion penetrated the fuel cell under the vehicle. We were all on fire. It was the initiation of a complex ambush.
Cash, mostly unhurt, but covered in fuel, dragged out the driver who was on fire, then raced to the back of the Bradley where he found Dodge, who had escaped through a small exit door. 5 others were still trapped inside the burning Bradley.
Sergeant Cash just appeared out of the darkness, and he looked at me. He's like, "Dodge, where are the boys?" I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
And I just looked at him, and he was only wearing his helmet, his body armor, and his boots, because everything else had been burned off of him. And without hesitation, after he asked me that question, he turned and he just climbed into the Bradley.
With gunfire raging, Sergeant Cash charged into the back of the burning vehicle and dragged out his wounded men over and over again. Sergeant Gary Mills was among those Sergeant Cash pulled out.
It was so thick of smoke. Only thing I felt was a hand reach and grab my leg and was helping me get out. I knew it was him. Unfortunately, you hear all the screams and everything, and you know that it wasn't nobody in there helping us.
Cash and the surviving soldiers were eventually evacuated to the burn unit at Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas. Cassanelle White Cash, Sergeant Cash's sister, was at her brother's bedside.
When I saw him, I wish I hadn't, because he was so swollen and wrapped up, but his face looked like my baby. He looked like Al.
You actually got to see Sergeant Cash in the hospital. What did you say to him? What did he say to you?
I asked him how he was doing, and he told me, "You know, Dodge, today I got up and I took 2 steps across the room." And then he said, "Tomorrow, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk across the room."
Sergeant Cash would die of his wounds on November 8, 2005. Of the 9 men in that vehicle, only 3 have survived. Cash was awarded a Silver Star, but as details of the attack emerged, a campaign started to get the award upgraded to the Medal of Honor. Recently, there have been calls to rename Fort Benning for Sergeant Cash, and Steelers player and Army veteran Alejandro Villanueva wore Cash's name on his helmet in support of the push to award him the Medal of Honor.
I find it remarkable that if this does happen, your baby brother would be the first African American to receive the Medal of Honor for their service in Iraq, Afghanistan. Is that important to you?
It's important that he receives it as a soldier for what he did. I don't ever want anybody to say he got it because he's a black man and there was a push. No, he got it because he deserved it.
I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. On this Veterans Day, we honor the men and women who have served and sacrificed for our country. President Trump making his first appearance today since losing the election. President-elect Biden paying his respects to veterans in Philadelphia. Biden is moving forward with his transition team, even though the current White House won't let them access key funds and intelligence reports. And over on the pandemic front, the U.S. reporting its 7th straight day of over 100,000 new coronavirus cases. Hospitalizations hitting new all-time highs. The CDC putting out new warnings about Thanksgiving. More on that coming up. But first, let's go to our reporters who are covering the Biden and Trump teams. NBC News correspondent Mike Memoli in Wilmington, Delaware, of course. NBC News correspondent Carol Lee in Washington, D.C. Carol, the president outside the White House visiting Arlington National Cemetery, where he laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. What are you hearing inside the White House about the president conceding it and maybe starting this transition?
Well, the main thing we're hearing, Allison, is that the president is not going to concede, at least not in the traditional way that you would expect and that we have seen over the decades. People, whether they're an incumbent or a candidate who've lost presidential elections, concede. We're told that the president, once he gets to a place where he's going to acknowledge that President-elect Joe Biden will be entering the White House in January, that he would say something along the lines of he doesn't agree with the results, he accepts them, but we'll actually really never know how valid they are. So leaving in doubt and in question potentially the actual results, even if he admits that he's not going to contest them at the time. And we're also told that in terms of the timing on that this could go on for some time. So aides had initially hoped that he would get to that place perhaps as early as this weekend, and that was a hope. It sounds like it will be a little bit longer than that, and there are those around the president who are saying he shouldn't give any speech like that until all of the votes are certified, and potentially not until the electors have cast their votes in December. So this could go on for another number of weeks. And meanwhile, what we're told is that the president's team around him, there's increasing frustration that he's in this position, that he won't commit to a path forward, not only for the next 70 days, but also what he's going to do once he leaves the White House. The one thing that one source told me that the president is doing is that he's preparing to be the loudest opposition leader out there, and that he is not going to go quietly and intends to remain a force once he does leave office. But in terms of a concession, I wouldn't expect to see anything like we've seen from other candidates or presidents in the past.
Mike, Joe Biden also honoring our servicemen and women today. This morning, he visited the Korean War Memorial. Biden doesn't seem to be particularly fazed by the lawsuits, the transition delays, at least not outwardly. How is his team moving forward, though, when they don't have access to basic things they need, like the presidential daily briefing?
Biden sort of set the tone that he was not worried, said it wasn't consequential. His team is moving forward. But, let's remind everybody of what's involved in a presidential transition. There are 4,000 positions in the federal government that are going to be turned over for a Biden administration. The entire West Wing, pretty much, is going to empty out in favor of a new Biden staff on January 20th. A lot of those positions require vetting. A lot of those positions require background checks. A lot of those positions also require Senate confirmation. And so every day that is delayed with not getting this assertion from the General Services Administration is a day that the Biden team loses in order to try to make progress towards those goals. And there's 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day. That may sound like a long time, But really, in terms of all that we just laid out, that's really just a bare minimum of what the Biden team really needs. So speaking with Biden transition officials, they're doing the best to adapt to these new circumstances. They're trying to, instead of getting their agency review teams into the administration, meeting with the career officials who may stay on, they're working from the outside, trying to speak with outside stakeholders about what they know. But I think the biggest concern among some Democrats and now even Republicans on Capitol Hill is about what you mentioned, the presidential daily brief. Biden has not had access to that. He has had some classified briefings during the campaign as the Democratic nominee, but not to the level of specificity about ongoing operations, deep information about threats facing the United States that he's going to need to be fully briefed on by Inauguration Day. And so as Carol lays out the timeline of once we were thinking this week and stretching potentially into next month, I think that's going to raise the level of concern on the Biden team that there's only so much they can do without all the access they need before they take some of the steps that perhaps they've been talking about, including legal action, Allison.
Carol, the president, of course, still claiming election fraud, but an international watch group that the Trump administration invited to monitor our election is saying it witnessed no irregularities in either Michigan or Georgia. Could you tell us more about their findings and what the administration is saying about it?
Yeah, talk about ironies, Allison.
Yeah.
This is the Organization of American States. It was an organization, a group that was hired by the State Department to do this. They put 28 observers, I want to get this right, into 13 from 13 different countries into various states, including Georgia and Michigan. And what they found is that there were no irregularities or voter fraud in the way that the president has been alleging. What's so interesting about that is we just heard from the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, yesterday, who had this very flip answer, and some critics found it disturbing when asked about a transition, saying, yes, we're going to have a transition to a second Trump term. And so, meanwhile, this organization that was hired by his own State Department is saying, undercutting exactly what the president is alleging in all of this. And we're also learning from our own reporting that officials overseas who are stationed overseas, who work for the State Department, have not received any guidance from the State Department or the government on how to react to the elections, what results, what to do, how they should proceed. And so some of them, we're told, are back channeling to members of the Biden transition team or people that they know who are associated with the president-elect, trying to figure out sort of what next steps might be. So a lot of confusion, not just here in Washington and across the country, but really across the world, where we have government officials who are stationed in capitals all over the place.
Mike, there are reports that Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, will leave his law firm around the inauguration to join the Biden administration. Do we have any confirmation or further information about that report?
Yeah, Allison, part of the history of having the first woman vice president is having the first second gentleman. Doug Emhoff are going to be taking that role on January 20th. And yes, my colleague Deepa Shivaram just confirmed as well that he will leave his law firm. Doesn't it sound strange to say join the administration? He's going to be part of the administration for sure, but obviously working alongside his wife, Senator Harris, soon to be Vice President Harris. And it's worth noting what we're seeing in terms of the first spouse as well on Joe Biden's side, Dr. Biden. She, of course, as second lady, continued to do what she's done throughout her professional career, which is teach. And we're told that she's going to continue to teach as the First Lady of the United States, which is going to be an interesting bit of history of her own. I actually interviewed Dr. Biden about this a year ago today, and she talked about what it was going to be like to be able to show that example. She said what a powerful thing it would be for other teachers throughout the country to see somebody as the First Lady also continuing to do what she would plan to do, which is to teach. As Joe Biden says, teaching isn't what she does, it's who she is. And so we're seeing a different, interesting comparison side by side of Dr. Biden and Doug Emhoff here.
It's really cool to see. And Mike, I just have to say, second gentleman has just such a nice ring about it. I don't know. It just sounds really cool. Let me ask you, are you hearing about any other names, any other people who might serve in the Biden administration? We've been loving playing the speculation who might end up their game, but you probably have some solid information.
It's bringing back those great days of the Veep stakes, isn't it, Allison?
Love those days.
This is certainly even on a wider scale. Exactly. So many positions to fill in terms of the cabinet. The Biden team's focus at this point is getting the West Wing filled first. Some of those other positions in the government as well that have to oversight and relationship with dealing with the pandemic. Now, we've been told all along that Ron Klain is the favorite for chief of staff. I've also been hearing this week that Steve Ricchetti, a longtime Biden advisor, his former chief of staff, also as vice president, is also in for a top West Wing role. And then in terms of the cabinet, the Biden team has been saying that likely we're not going to hear some of those positions until December, although Biden did say yesterday he hopes to be able to at least release a couple of those names before Thanksgiving. If we do hear some cabinet positions that early, expect that they might be HHS and also potentially Treasury Secretary. As Biden has laid out, we're dealing with a pandemic and we're dealing with an economic crisis, and they would want to set the tone very quickly with those two key positions.
For sure. All right, Mike, we'll come up with a catchy name to replace the Veep stick since we enjoyed it so much. Mike Memoli, Carol Lee, thank you both, as always. Georgia's Secretary of State making a big announcement today about the presidential race recount.
With the margin being so close, it will require a full by-hand recount in each county. This will help build confidence. It will be an audit, a recount, and a recanvass all at once. It will be a heavy lift.
The Trump campaign and the Georgia Republican Party had asked for a ballot hand count before Georgia's results are certified. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Atlanta. I just want to say that one more time. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Atlanta. Priscilla, I know the news broke yesterday, but couldn't be more excited. We're so thrilled to have you here all the time. So let me ask you, the Secretary of State said several times that recount would happen with high-speed machines. Now it's by hand. Why the change here?
Well, thank you very much for that, Allison. But yeah, so you heard him there saying that this is going to be all in one, an audit, a recount, and a recanvass. And that's sort of the key part of this, because originally, all along, the state was planning to do an audit, and those ballots were going to be counted by hand. But this was going to be an audit of a sample of ballots. And you heard him there now saying that because it is the presidential race that is going to be audited, and given how close the margins are, they do intend to count all of the ballots by hand as part of that. And so we're talking about nearly 5 million ballots that are going to be counted. And what some people are sort of talking about here is just the timing of this announcement. The Secretary of State has said that this is done to ensure the accuracy, the fairness, and to make sure that people feel there is integrity in this election. But this announcement was made less than 24 hours after the Trump campaign recount effort led by Representative Doug Collins sent a letter to the Secretary of State requesting this exact thing, that a recanvass be done by hand. And we heard a little while after the Secretary of State gave that briefing, we heard from the Trump campaign holding a press conference or a press call. Take a listen to what they had to say.
Every time we take a step along this process, we believe we are getting closer to our goal, and that is the president winning these states and ultimately being reelected. Today's announcement celebrating the hand recount in Georgia is another step along that path.
And so you hear there the Trump campaign feeling as though this is the Secretary of State agreeing to what they have requested and really hailing this as a bit of a victory for them. And again, this recount is happening before the state certifies those results. Now, once the state does certify the results on November 20th, the Trump campaign could then formally request a recount on their behalf. Right now, this is happening at the state's behest, so to speak. But the Trump campaign could request that, in which case that would be done by a machine scanner unless a judge rules that recount needed to take place by hand as well. Allison?
Priscilla, a whole lot of recounting going on in Georgia. Let me ask, because it's like the question everybody just wants to know all the time is when? Does it seem like they'll still be able to meet that November 20th deadline to certify results? Are they concerned about this just going on and on and on and on?
Well, the state is saying that they will be able to meet that November 20th deadline, but that's really one of the big questions here. You know, they held another meeting this afternoon where officials from the state essentially said that tomorrow morning they're going to hold a statewide call with all of the counties to go over the procedures and the training required to begin this by-hand recount, and that counties could begin that process as early as tomorrow afternoon. But to put this into context, here in Georgia, absentee ballots alone were able to start being counted before Election Day, and it still took a number of days after the election before we had a fuller picture of the results here. And so now they're looking at around 9 days to count, again, at nearly 5 million ballots. So it remains to be seen if they're actually going to meet that deadline or not. Allison?
Yeah, with today being November 11th, they better get moving. Priscilla, let me ask you about the strain that this puts on the counties. We know some of them have local elections next month, and then we have the runoff races, like the one on January 5th with 2 Senate seats up for grabs. How tough is this going to be for the counties in Georgia to get all of this done?
Right. That was one of the concerns that the Secretary of State mentioned in his press briefing earlier today, and said that he is pushing the state elections to January to go with those federal elections in order to take some of the pressure and relieve some of the pressure from these counties that are going to be working on this recount. But the fact of the matter is those elections are already underway. People are requesting those absentee ballots now. The counties were supposed to begin sending those ballots out next week. We're out to the counties to see if that timeline has changed at all. But the Secretary of State essentially said earlier today, you know, folks are going to be getting a lot of overtime over the next couple of weeks. And as a reminder, these are election workers who already were staying up all hours of the night this past week just trying to count all of those absentee ballots. So this is certainly going to be a huge lift for them. And this is also something that the counties are going to have to foot the bill for. Allison?
Ooh, it's going to be a process, and it's going to be expensive. We've been saying that a lot about Georgia lately, Priscilla. Thank you so much, and welcome to the team. I speak on behalf of everyone. We are so psyched you're here.
Thank you.
Staff shakeups at the Pentagon. Several Trump loyalists promoted to top positions after Defense Secretary Mark Esper was fired. National security experts now accusing the Trump administration of misusing their power.
And is consistent with how Donald Trump has conducted the presidency. He has determined from the outset to bend every institution to his will. And so many of those who are required to follow the command of the commander-in-chief are coming to the conclusion that the orders that he's giving are inappropriate, they're either illegal or they're unethical, and therefore some of them are resigning as a result of that.
NBC News Pentagon and national security correspondent Courtney Cubey joins me now. Wow, Courtney, you've been busy this week. Let's talk about who resigned at the Pentagon and who is moving into their positions. A lot of moving pieces here.
That's right. And not all these resignations